I was born in Egypt, a long time ago. And when I was born into the tribe of Levi, which is a Jewish tribe. We had lived in Egypt for hundreds of years, generations. We had come there seeking asylum from a family, and one of our own was second to the premier. So it was safe and it was wonderful, and we settled into Goshen and had an incredible life. But then the pharaohs changed. Pharaoh is the god of Egypt. He's the king. He's appointed by their gods, and he is everything. And Hebrew people multiply, and we become strong. And he was afraid that we would cause a revolution in his own land just because of our sheer numbers. So this incredibly evil Pharaoh was trying to suppress us. He enslaved us. I was born into slavery, bondage, captivity, no rights. I'm the eldest in my family. They call me Miriam. And I have had a little brother who was 2 years younger than me. So my earliest memories are Egypt. I remember the taste of the river Nile. I remember the sound of the crickets. I can remember the growl of the crocodiles. I remember the smell of the spicy foods of Egypt. I remember the oppression. I remember the sound of crying. I remember the sound of whips and the sight of blood. But my earliest solid memory was about 5 years old. And what should have been so exciting wasn't. My mom had found out she was pregnant. And that should be thrilling. It should be something you celebrate. But the new Pharaoh had brought in a new law. To cut down our numbers, he had ordered that every male Hebrew born would be thrown into the river Nile to drown and to feed the crocodiles. And it wasn't just the soldiers who would do it. If an Egyptian saw that you had a baby boy, they could take him from your arms and throw him into the river. They even instructed our Hebrew midwives who helped our women give birth to kill the newborns. The Hebrew woman is strong. We are brave. So they told Pharaoh that the Hebrew women give birth without them. They're very strong and they didn't really need us. And so they continued to minister without killing the newborns. And when my mother's time came near, in Hebrew culture they would all gather around and help with the birth. And although you should delight in the son, my mother's reaction was to cry. And the Hebrew women had arrived, and they came with their capes low over their faces, so that no one would know it was the Hebrew midwives. And when they'd made mom comfortable, they left quietly, so no one would know that they had been. And my mom looked at this beautiful baby, and she just felt it was a gift from God. He was special. So they hid him. 3 months. For 3 months, nobody knew she had a baby boy. But then his lungs grew, and you could hear him. And if I close my eyes, I can still see my mother taking papyrus and weaving it into a basket, which she then put tar and pitch on, so that it would be waterproof, just like the Egyptian boats. And she took my 3-month-old baby brother, she wrapped him in a blanket, and with tears pouring down her face, she kissed that little face, put the blanket over him, and put him into the basket. And I held her hand as we walked to the river. And she took that little basket with this precious life, and she placed it in the reeds. She said a prayer and she walked away. He was now in God's hands. There was nothing more she could do. I could see her shoulders shaking as she went. But I've always been quite feisty, and I wanted to see what would happen. She prayed over this baby. What could God do? We hadn't heard from God in hundreds of years. What could our God do? Yes. 35, I was little, and I watched. And after a short while, a royal procession came down from the palace. It was the Pharaoh's daughter, a princess of Egypt. And you could see their white robes fluttering against their beautiful bronze legs. And their laughter jingled with their bracelets as they came. And as they got down to the water, I saw Pharaoh's daughter look across the reeds. And I could see her dark eyes under that fringe pointing, an imperious look, as she sent one of her maidservants to see, what is that over there? And the movement of the woman walking through the water must have woken the baby. And as she picked it up, started to cry. And I wanted to run to him, but I was scared. And the woman carried her to the Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter unwrapped the covering. And she looked down and put one hand into the little basket. And I don't know if he did, but I just imagined that little baby reaching up and grabbing the royal finger in his. And a look of softness came over her face. And she stared down and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." And there was such compassion and softness that I left my fear in the reeds. And without thought, with the innocence of a child, I ran to her and said, "Would you like a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby?" And she looked at me with those cold-rimmed eyes. She said, "Yes, go." Boy, did I go. I ran to find my mum. She hadn't got home yet. And I grabbed her hand and I told her what had happened. God has done something. It's a miracle. Pharaoh's daughter wants you to look after him. You know, she kicked off her sandals so she could run faster. And we ran hand in hand back to where Pharaoh's daughter had lifted my baby brother up and was holding him, and his little fat hand was against her face. And you could just see she was enamored. And she looked my mother up and down, just like you would a cow. "You'll do. I will pay you to raise this child till he is weaned." We were so sad. What do you say? We said nothing. And she turned. She needed no answer. She was royal. And she walked away with her maidservants, their hips swaying as they went back up to the palace. What a miracle. What an incredible moment. My mom was being paid to breastfeed her own baby. And she had the protection of Pharaoh's daughter. The man who wanted her son dead, his daughter had just rescued our boy. And so for 2.5 years, we kept the baby. We taught him everything we could. My mother and father were from the tribe of Levi, and they taught him about our God who had no image. Our God who was the only, the God. And I loved him. And I fed him water, and I cuddled him, and he was my little boy. And we had to teach him all we could about being Hebrew. Because when he was weaned, my mother took him to the palace and handed him to Pharaoh's daughter. I often asked her, "How did you do it?" She did it to save his very life. And as she pushed this child to walk forward, his new adopted mother looked down and smiled, and she said, "I will call him Moses, for I drew him out of the water." And we had to turn and walk away. And there was a huge empty space in our home and in our hearts. My mother cried for him, for there were no visits. He no longer belonged to us. We followed his progress as we could, through rumors and gossip. And we heard he was a bright boy. We knew that. He was Hebrew, of course he was bright. He learned everything in that Egyptian court. He learned politics. He learned the art of war. He learned culture. He learned everything Egyptian. And sometimes we saw his chariots going way across in the sun. And we would look at him and go, we think that's our son. But he didn't. We heard a rumor that he went up to the mines, to the Sinai Desert, to where they were mining for turquoise, where some of our people were slaves. But we're not sure. And then a long time passed, and the bondage continued, and the whips continued. And the turquoise mines, they found it was really low-grade turquoise, and they brought the people back, and we continued in our main thing, which was making bricks. And the big clay pits using straw to bind the bricks together. 40 years went by. And then we heard the Egyptian prince was on the run, fleeing for his life from Pharaoh. He'd been out one day, and he saw an overseer, they're like the slave masters, whipping one of the Hebrews. Something in him must have snapped, and he took the staff in his hand, and he killed the Egyptian. That's penalty of death, and Pharaoh wanted him dead. So he fled. He fled into the Sinai Desert, and we thought, what was all that for? He was saved as a baby, and now? And our grinding lives went on. Slavery is monotonous. It's boring. It's grinding. It's heartbreaking. We had no hope. Nothing in us gave us hope that we would ever be. And another 40 years went by. So I was about 85. And one day Aaron said he's going for a walk in the wilderness. My brother, who was just older than Moses. Okay, not an usual thing to do. And he was gone quite a while. When he came back, he had a stranger with him. A stranger with a long Bedouin beard and a turban on his head. But when I looked into his eyes, it was my brother Moses. He'd returned. I flew across that room and held him. And my mother came in and I heard her gasp, and we were a tangle of arms and hands and hair and turbans and tears. And we quickly finished preparing the meal and put it on the table. And Moses started to tell us where he had been. He had fled for his life. The rumors were true. Pharaoh wanted him dead. That Pharaoh was gone. There was a new Pharaoh. And as he had fled, he had come across this well, Jacob's well. And there was a group of young girls, 17, 18-year-olds, pretty Bedouin girls, trying to get water for their sheep and goats. And some other travelers had arrived and were chasing them away, so they could not water their flocks. And he said he was angry and he was upset, and he grabbed that staff and he went for them. Now bear in mind, yes, there were lots of them. He was a trained Egyptian general, and they fled before him. And those girls had gone back and told their dad what had happened, and their father, a Bedouin, his name was Jethro, a distant descendant from Abraham, so actually related to us, had said, go and fetch him. Where are your manners? Bedouins are extremely hospitable. And the girls had come and fetched him, and they'd given him. And he ended up staying. And he'd married one of Jethro's daughters. I had 2 nephews, Bedouin nephews, but they were not with him. And he told us how, from being this fancy Egyptian prince, he had become a humble Bedouin shepherd. And in these 40 years, he'd learned the way of the desert. He'd learned how to find water. He'd learned when to rest and when to move. He'd learned to find pathways. He'd learned to find safety. He learned to fend off animals and protect his sheep. 40 years. And in his heart, he had thought, Egypt is behind. He said he did think of us. But it was far behind in the past, and there was no way he could come home. And he had a new life. And then one day, he'd gone to the mountain of Horeb, or the mountain of God. And he'd been underneath, and it was hot. It was a hot time of the day, and he was sitting with his back against the cliff, letting his sheep just graze where they would. And he said his eyes were actually closed, and you could see the sunlight through his eyes. That's how bright it was. And then he heard crackles like flames. Now, in the Sinai desert, it gets so hot, and there are little bits of quartz that lie on the ground. And sometimes the light does reflect off them, and it causes fire. So he thought it was that, and he looked up to see. But then he looked again, and the bush is not burning. I'm going to take a closer look. So he said he went closer, and as he looked at this bush, the voice of God talked to him and said, "Take off your shoes, you are on holy ground." He was gobsmacked, he was in awe. And he told us how God, from that burning bush, said that he had heard our cries in Egypt. He had heard the people begging him to release them from this torment of slavery. And God said he was to return to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let us go. I'm like, wow, you heard the very voice of God? Did you just put your shoes on and run? He said, I'm unqualified. I haven't even been brought up reading anything about God. I know about the Egyptian gods. I know what Jethro has taught me. But what is your name? Because all the Egyptian gods have names. And he said, this voice from the bush said to him, I am. That means he's the eternal. He's the God from before creation to the end of time. That's the God who's sending him. And he said, but I'm a wanted man. I'm a murderer. And he continued to tell us his story, how he'd gone back and told Jethro that he was to meet. And his wife and son had walked part of the way with, and they'd had adventures on the way. And then Aaron had met him and brought him home. And he said that God had told him Aaron was to help him, just to be his support, and go with to the elders first and convince them with signs and wonders that he was from God and would go to Pharaoh with their support. And when they left, Mom and I sat there, amazed. He told us that staff, you know the staff he used to kill an Egyptian and to save those maidens? God had told him to throw it down, and he threw down his shepherd's staff, and it turned into a snake. And when he picked it back up, it turned back into a staff. And then when he argued a bit more with God, God had said, put your hand into your robe, which he did. And when he took it out, it was diseased. It was white and flaking and oozing. And God said, put it back, and he did, and it was healed. Signs and wonders we had not seen. My heart suddenly sparkled. Was this why God saved this baby 80 years ago? Was this why 80 years ago he got Pharaoh's daughter to walk at the river? For this time? For now? When Moses and Aaron came back, Aaron's eyes were like this, because Moses had done signs and wonders, and the elders had said, you are from God. We will support you. Now, to go before Pharaoh is very frightening. Does that, they can chop off your head, throw you to the crocodiles. He is all powerful. But they went with their staffs, Moses, Aaron, and the elders. And they didn't go and just say, let us all go forever. They went in and said, Pharaoh, we are asking for you to let our people go just for 3 days into the wilderness to worship our God and make sacrifice. Pharaoh, in his arrogance, no. But Moses had been warned by God that Pharaoh's heart was very hard. So he had expected a no. But we didn't expect the consequence of the request. Pharaoh said, if we had time to listen to nonsense and time to wander off into the wilderness. We obviously weren't working very hard, were we? We must be lazy. So he said that we were to make the same number of bricks as before, but from now on, we could find our own straw. You can't make bricks without straw. Everyone, the elderly, the children, the women, we ran. We quickly gleaned from the close-by areas, but then we had to go further afield and bring it back, and we could not meet the quota. And the beatings got worse. And the people started to cry out to Moses, "What have you done? We are no more free and we are in more bondage than ever before." But Moses said, "Trust God. He has said he will bring Pharaoh to his knees. He will bring plagues after plague. He will break the Egyptians till they ask us to." I was angry. Every time I carried that straw, breaking my back with my fingers torn, I was angry with Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron, on God's command, went back and found Pharaoh at the river Nile. And Moses said to him, "Let God's people go." No. So Aaron threw down his staff, and it turned into a serpent. But there was black magic, witchcraft within Pharaoh's courts, and Pharaoh's magicians did the same. But Aaron's snake ate theirs. And even then, Pharaoh's arrogance. So Moses was instructed to take his staff and lift it up over the river Nile. And he said to Pharaoh, "If you do not let these people go, this river will run red with blood, and the fish will die and it will be contaminated, and you cannot drink it." Pharaoh looked away and said, and so Aaron did. And as he spoke, the river took the color of the sun. It was red, and as we watched, the fish started to come floating there, and the smell was putrid. And it wasn't just the river Nile. Every canal, every other river leading in and out was contaminated. There was no water for the Egyptians to drink. They started to dig trenches next to the Nile looking for water. And still, a week later, Pharaoh would not do that. So Moses went back. We're a tenacious family. He went back, and on God's command, he said, "If you do not let the people go, God will bring a plague of frogs on you. They will come up from the river and be everywhere." Pharaoh said no. So Moses called for the frogs, and the next morning they came up underwater, their fat, squishy little bodies sliding underneath the doors, into the windows. They were in the food barrels, they were in the water barrels, they were in the beds, they were on the plates, they were everywhere. Pharaoh's magicians made frogs come up too, but they could not make the frogs go away. Neither could Pharaoh. They could not gather them, there were too many. And so he called for Moses and said, "If you take the frogs away, we'll let you go." So Moses did. Pray, and the frogs died. And they had to scoop them up in barrows, and the smell was unbearable. The whole country stank of rotten frogs. And Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh. "Let our people go and worship their God in the desert." He said, "No." And they said, "If you do not, God will send gnats, tiny little muggies, to come and infest the land." And he said no. So Aaron touched the ground with his staff, and as he did, the ground erupted with gnats. These little things went into people's eyes, in their ears, they were stuck on their lips, they were on the livestock, they were shaking their heads, irritated, demented by these things. They were all over. And still, Pharaoh would not listen. And the magicians couldn't do it. And they said to Pharaoh, "This is the hand of God." And still that arrogant man would not listen. Moses and Aaron went back. And this time, on the low, God released a plague of flies. Buzzing, dirty, filthy flies, who would sit on the animals' excrement and then fly into the people's faces. The floor was black. The sky, you couldn't breathe for flies. I forgot to mention, didn't come to Goshen, where the Jewish people lived. God protected us. And Pharaoh called and said, take the flies, we'll let you go. And of course, when the flies were gone, he didn't. So Aaron went back to Pharaoh. And he said to Pharaoh, you've got to let the people go. This time, God will strike your livestock. He will send a pestilence on the livestock in the field, and they will fall, rotting to the ground. And Pharaoh said, hold on, I tell you what, the men can go. Just the men. Because if you take the woman with, it's obvious you're up to evil. He said the evil Pharaoh. And Moses replied, no, this is not an option. So God sent the pestilence on the livestock. Any animals who were outside in the fields died. Unless they were in Goshen and belonged to us. And you know already some of Pharaoh's officials were getting nervous. This was starting to cost the economy of Pharaoh. So the next time Aaron came with Moses, and my brother said, let our people go, Pharaoh said, no. And this time, he said, took soot from in the furnaces, the soot that we use to make the bricks. And they said, God will scatter the soot across Egypt, and the people will break out in suppurating boils. Pharaoh said, no, I will not let you go. So they did. They released this dust, and as the soot flew through Egypt, the people were covered with sores and boils that oozed, that flaked open. They were so painful that when the magicians tried to stand before Pharaoh, they could not. They were in such pain. The palace people were being affected. And Pharaoh said, okay, I will let you go. Take this pestilence, boils away, and I will let the people go. And Moses said in his heart he knew. Pharaoh's heart was hard. And God had said, I want to destroy all the gods of Egypt. And Pharaoh still changed his mind and would not let us go. And so, the next plague God sent was that of hail. But the hail was like nothing Egypt had ever seen or ever saw as a nation. The hail was large. Anyone in the fields, outside, man or beast, died from this hail because it was hail with fire. And it poured down over Egypt. Some of the officials had heard and quickly got their livestock and their servants and slaves in, but many didn't. And Pharaoh sent for Aaron and Moses this time. And he said, please remove this and I will let you go. But once again, he didn't. And when Moses said, let our people go, our God has decreed we need to go, he said, okay, you can go. You can take the men, the women and children, but you can't take the livestock. And Moses said, if we are to sacrifice, we don't know what we will need. So we need to take everything and sacrifice and worship our God the way He has told us to. No compromise to do it the way you think we should. So Pharaoh said no. And this time came a plague locusts. Locusts that came up in swarms. But Moses even warned him. He said, tomorrow the locusts will arrive. And that day, an easterly wind began to blow. It blew all day, and it blew all night. And at first it was just the sound of the wind. But in the morning, the Egyptians woke up to the sound of 1 billion wings. They woke up to swarms forming in the very skies, clouds of them. It looked like a sandstorm. As they gathered en masse, and as the wind died down, the locusts fell to the ground, and you could hear them chewing through every green thing they could find. The smallest shoot, every branch, every leaf. Decimated. It was gone. And Egypt called. Pharaoh called and he said, please get rid of this, and I will let you go. And Moses and Aaron now knew it was unlikely that he would let the people go. But Moses prayed, and a westerly wind came up and blew all the locusts into the Red Sea. This was God's way. He was showing He is in control of all nature. He is the sovereign God. And then the next plague came, when Pharaoh once again arrogantly, stubbornly refused. God sent darkness over the whole region, but not mild darkness. Darkness that if the Egyptians did this, they could not see. They could not move for darkness. Once again, Goshen was fun, but the Egyptian people suffered. How could a Pharaoh say he cared for his people when he allowed this? When Moses went that last time and said, let my people go, Pharaoh said, I will. And if you come before me again, it will be the last time you see anything else. And Moses said, his heart was in his throat, but he stood there under God's orders. He said, I accept that, but I am telling you, God is going to send a plague so harsh that you will let us go. So harsh that every family in Eden will feel the pain of your arrogance. God is sending an angel of death who will kill the firstborn son in every family. And with that, Moses left. When he came to us, you could see he had heard from them because his face was different. And he just said, these are the instructions. And we had to gather a sheep, each of us, pure lamb, a male lamb. And either a family had a lamb or some small family shared one. We gathered those on the 10th day. And on the 14th day, at twilight, we had to cut their throats and collect the blood. And with that blood, each family took a hyssop branch, which is from a desert plant, and dipped it into the blood and painted it on the door frames. And each family took that lamb and cooked it with bitter herbs. And our instructions from Moses was this: do not leave your homes. When you eat ready to travel. Have your cloak tucked into your belt. Have your sandals on your feet. Have your staff in your hand. Make unleavened bread. For this is the night of the Lord's Passover. And the blood on the doors will protect you from the angel. When you've seen the plagues, when you've seen the locusts, you've seen the boils, do you think you do what God tells you? Really quickly. So each family did exactly that. And that night, we picked up our clothes and put them on. We didn't normally eat with clothes. As if ready to leave. We sat at our table and we ate. We had our shoes on our feet ready to go. Our staff in hand ready. And Goshen was quiet. And at midnight, the angel of the Lord passed over Egypt. And there arose a wailing from every Egyptian home as the Lord's angel passed, the firstborn sons died. From in the stables, from the poorest slave to Pharaoh's own son. And while it was still dark, Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron and said, take the people. Just get out of it. And when we had been preparing our feast, Moses had said, go to each Egyptian neighbor and ask them for silver and gold and clothing. And we had. And they gave generously, saying, yes, please take it and just go. Just go. Our land has been decimated by your God. Go. And we did. We quickly took our unleavened bread, we wrapped it in cloths, we shifted our cloaks back onto our shoulders, ready to go. We picked up our children and our bundles and the booty that we had from the Egyptian slave drivers. And we left. Under the banner of God, we left a country whose economy was broken, whose people wept. And each day as we walked, there was a pillar cloud in front of us to show us where to go. And at night there was a pillar of fire to give us light. And we traveled, we did a bit of a circuitous route, but we just followed the path, with Moses and Aaron leading us. And we got to the sea. And on the banks of the sea we set up camp. And I can still remember the day before we set up, we're free. But as that bubble of joy started to come up, we saw dust coming from inside of Egypt. Clouds of dust. Then we started to hear hoofbeats and chariot wheels crunching. Pharaoh had once again changed his mind. He was sending his entire Egyptian army to kill us. If he couldn't have us as slaves, he would not have us free. And the people turned to Moses. Did you bring us to the desert to die? We would rather have been slaves in Egypt. And Moses stood strong, and he said, honor our God, trust him for provision. He will see us through. And with that, he took his staff and held it out over the sea of reeds. And it parted. It parted to 2 walls of water, and the ground was dry. And we began to hustle across. It was about 16 kilometers that we had to move. And the pillar of cloud moved to the back to protect us. And as we watched the people come across, in awe and amazement, we could see the Egyptian army gaining on us. And as our last people, the last little goat, set foot on the other side, Moses dropped his arm. And the walls of water came crashing down on the entire Egyptian army. The sound was deafening, but not enough to drown out the screams of the soldiers as they tumbled and died in the sea of water. And this may sound bloodthirsty, but at that moment, the honor of God who could do anything, the God above every Egyptian god, the God above Pharaoh, the God who controlled the very universe, Moses and I began to sing. And as Moses finished singing, I couldn't help myself but grab a tambourine and dance before the God who is almighty and all-powerful. And that's what you're going to do. So, if you don't want to get out your chair, you do not have to. I have a very beautiful worship song that's by a Messianic Jewish singer, and she sings Exodus 15 in Hebrew. And Jen was going to read it for you, but unfortunately she had to go. So your little ribbons, if you don't want to get up, you can just wave them around. But I want you to feel, imagine what they have seen. Imagine what they have experienced. And now they see not only is the people who enslaved them, who brutalized them, who threw all their children in the river, gone. So is their army that gave them power. That is the God we serve. The God who in the darkest hour, when everything seems against you, when there's load shedding and threats of violence and, that's the God we serve.